Hello everybody, I'm your Minna Van Dyken, MD. I'm here today with the wonderful Dr. Linda Carney. Tell us about yourself, Linda. Where are you from? Why are you here on Maui?
Oh, I was flown over by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, thank you very much, Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, to give lectures on Oahu and Maui, and they flew my husband Sean Carney and me from Austin, Texas, where I have a solo general practice.
Awesome. So you practice in Austin. How
Just
long
near
have you
Austin.
been in practice?
Whoa.
In your solo practice?
In my solo practice. Moved to Texas in 2005, opened the practice in 2006.
Awesome. Cool. And you are board certified in 2 different boards, right?
I am. I'm board certified by the American Board of Emergency Medicine. Took a residency in that, did that full-time until 1996, and then switched to general practice. And in 2017, when the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine did their first wave of board certifying, I was in that group.
Cool. You were the inaugural group.
Yes, and you also,
Congratulations.
thank you, and you also are
Yeah,
board certified.
it's super fun to meet other physicians that are board certified in that, and I think the number's just going to get bigger and bigger as we
Yes.
keep going forward.
Yes, lifestyle medicine has such a power to reverse disease that the other medical specialties can only manage.
Right. I agree with that. Totally agree. I went to your talk when you were on Maui. Great job, by the way. It was
Thank you.
really fun to hear your take on things. So I can't wait to get into some of the nitty gritty regarding that. Your talk, I thought, was really interesting. You kind of pivoted on quite a few points, and I feel, and maybe I'm biased because my channel loves this topic, but I feel like you talked a lot about fiber. Is
I sure
that
did.
right?
I did talk a lot
Yeah.
about fiber, starting with Dr. Dennis Burkitt of Burkitt's lymphoma. He was a missionary surgeon to Africa. He found the etiology, which is the cause of a pediatric lymphoma now called Burkitt's lymphoma.
Yeah.
And basically he studied colon cancer rates in Africa, and he found that the more fiber, the less cancer. So that was a very significant finding, and we stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm just grateful to him for his pioneering work.
True. Yeah. And I think, you know, as a surgeon, the amount of research that he got done and everything, he must have been so busy. Like, he's definitely a role model. I don't know how he
Yes,
did that.
very inspiring.
So fiber, I think since Dennis Burkitt's time until now, we're finding so much more about fiber that we
Really?
ever knew.
Oh, really?
So-
Fiber does so much for us.
Totally, totally. What else, in your opinion, is the most important things that fiber does?
Let's talk about soluble and insoluble
Okay,
fiber,
yeah.
because soluble fiber, as you know, swells up in water when you cook it, like think oats or beans. And soluble fiber lowers cholesterol.
Right. So that's the
And-
type of fiber that our body digests and can actually absorb nutrients from and that type of stuff, right?
In my learning, I thought that fiber was only digestible not by us but by our gut microbiome. It's like food for them.
Yeah.
And so it does really good things for us. We're not getting calories from fiber, but yeah, it's really great for us. We don't have the enzymes to break it down like the gut microbiome does. But one thing I love about soluble fiber is it's sticky, and it
Yeah.
hangs on to glucose molecules, so releasing them into the bloodstream one at a time, and that prevents the spikes of glucose in the bloodstream. And when
Right.
blood sugar spikes, it's very inflammatory, so
Totally.
it can lead towards arthritis and, of course, diabetes type 2, but also it triggers the release of IGF-1. I know that's a favorite subject of yours. I like it too.
Yeah.
IGF-1 it's a growth promoter, and it's implicated in the initiation of cancer.
The IGF-1, what I think is super interesting, like the Larone people that are in South America, they have a genetic deficiency, so they don't produce IGF-1, and so these people, they're short stature, and actually they found 0 cases of cancer among those people, which is
Wow.
super interesting.
Interesting.
So I don't know, there's definitely a link between IGF-1 and cancer and stature too, so
Right.
the lower we can keep it in our body, the better.
And that makes sense because growth promoters promote growth, and height is one indicator of growth.
Yeah.
And growth out of control, that's how we define cancer. When cells
Totally.
are growing out of control, that's the initiation and progression of cancer.
Right. Before I forget, I'm totally going to jump topics because I do want to talk with you really quick about your medical directorship with RIP and
Oh.
the Engine 2 immersion programs and all that,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I just think that's super unique. And you were their very first medical director, right?
I was very grateful. Rip is from Austin. I'm
Yeah.
near Austin. So right place, right time. I was grateful
Totally.
to be hired as the first medical director for the Engine 2 immersions. This is where we took about 100 employees of Whole Foods Market at a time to a beautiful resort just north of Austin, Texas, and we fed them. We lived with them for 1 week, and we fed them a diet without meat, dairy, eggs, oil, alcohol, caffeine. And my job as medical director was to measure the weights and the blood pressures at the beginning, at the end.
So just to recap, these people were like omnivores. They
Yes.
ate everything when they came to the immersion, and then they went completely whole food, plant-based, no oil.
Right.
And you kind of oversaw the transition.
Right, I
Okay,
did. And
okay.
my job was to help them to transition off their blood pressure medicines before the blood pressures got too low, and off the insulin doses for the type 2 diabetics before the blood sugars got too low. In fact, even for type 1 diabetics, I was cutting insulin doses about 20% per day to keep them safe. And it was fantastic. We had amazing results in just 1 week. Within 1 week, one person's cholesterol fell 100 points in 1 week, eating all that the person
Wow.
wanted: breakfast, lunch, dinner. They could have snacks if they wanted.
100 points.
Yes,
That's huge.
And they were sitting down, listening to lectures, about 40 hours of lecture in the week, and food demos and everything.
Yeah.
So they weren't exercising all day long. We know that exercise is helpful to lower cholesterol, but we only offered 1 hour of exercise daily, and it was optional.
The way I see things too is diet is king as far as weight loss and health measures, and exercise is additive, but I think diet is number one for sure.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think diet is about 80% of it. We cannot out-exercise a poor diet. And when I
Totally.
say poor, I mean poor in fiber, because the more fiber in the diet, the healthier.
Yeah. And the one thing I think a lot of people don't know is that things that are not plants, like animal foods, there's no fiber in them.
That's
like
right.
Zero fiber.
Zero
So-
fiber in eggs. There's zero fiber in cheese. There's no fiber in meat or fish.
Yeah,
or,
yeah. Back to the microbiome with the fiber, which is cool too. So we were talking about the types of fiber and what you can eat, etc. Your microbiome gets healthier, right? Like the more fiber. The variety of different types of fiber you eat, etc.
Yes, the insoluble fiber, it does not swell up in water when you cook it, and it does not
Yeah.
lower cholesterol, but it fills you up. It takes up room in your stomach, but it adds no calories. So
Yeah.
that makes insoluble fiber the weight loss wonder, because it's going to give you satiety. That's the satisfaction from your meals. Bulk plus fiber plus water equals bulk. And you
Yeah.
have to have bulk in your stomach for satiety.
To feel full. Yeah.
And
yeah.
insoluble fiber does that so well. And so insoluble fiber is like a medicine against obesity and overweight.
Right. Or a treatment even.
Yeah, treatment,
So,
that's right.
so what are some good examples of insoluble fiber that we could just pick up at the store?
The celery and vegetables and leafy greens and so many, the fruit, just all kinds of plant-based, fruit, nuts, seeds.
Yeah,
Yep,
for sure. The
Fiber in all of
legumes,
those.
For sure.
Yep, and beans, of course. Probably, I think of beans with the soluble fiber more, but they've got insoluble also.
Yeah.
And beans are probably the most fiber per calorie that you can get.
Totally. Like black beans.
Yeah, so great.
Yeah.
Black beans are really low in fat. They're only 3% of their calories come from fat in black beans. So yeah, if you're trying to lose weight and you like black beans, you're in luck. More black beans, easier to lose weight.
Totally. So let's talk about losing weight. I meet a lot of people who are overweight and they try to go vegan, and they seem to not be losing weight. And I have my take on it. I even did a video on it, but I kind of want to know what is your perspective, and what do you tell those patients that can't lose weight and they're like, "But doctor, I'm vegan. I am eating only plants." What do you tell them?
A vegan diet is good, but a vegan diet is not enough for certain people with a genetic strike against them. Some people just genetically, they've got a harder time losing weight. They're very efficient at storing body fat. And for them, we need to teach them about calorie concentration, which I'm sure you do. And there are some plant foods that are very low in calorie concentration.
Yeah.
Like leafy greens have only about 100 calories per pound of leafy greens. So you can eat a lot
Could eat
of
those
them,
all day.
and you could not physically hold enough in your stomach to gain weight on them. But leafy greens don't have enough calories to satisfy you, so you need the other kinds of plant foods. But at the other end of the scale, There's oil, which is completely vegan, like olive oil, probably the very best of all the oils. But it's 100% of its calories from fat. There's no carbohydrate, there's no protein, and so there are more than 4,000 calories per pound of olive oil. So a little bit is going to go a long way, and it's going to have metabolic effects and make you insulin resistant. And insulin has some side effects, which is to make you hungry and to make you store body fat. So you really don't want to trigger insulin with glucose spikes, but it's not sugar that even refined sugar, which I tend to not eat and advise my patients not to eat. That's not what's causing diabetes, and that's not what's causing overweight. And the food industry wants to blame and vilify sugar, but it's really the fat that we eat becomes the fat that we wear, according to Dr. John McDougall, and I totally agree with him.
I do think, especially in this day and age, carbohydrates are all lumped together and they're like vilified by a lot of people. And And so I have patients come to me, maybe they have diabetes or something, and they say, oh no, I can't have carbs. Everybody tells me I can't have carbs. And they're thinking every single vegetable is a high carb, bad for you vegetable. So do you run across that, and how do you straighten your patients out with that?
That's a very prevalent attitude. A lot of people have that misconception. And I notice that the people who understand carbohydrates call them carbohydrates, and the people who don't understand it very well call them carbs. I've just
I never thought of that.
But complex carbohydrates are where it's at. They should be the basis of our calories.
Totally.
And when you draw a line, you have a list of all the plant-based foods, and some are very high in calorie concentration, and some are low in calorie concentration. And you draw this line. If you eat above this line, which is the beans and the whole grains and the fruits and the veggies, that's in descending order of calorie concentration. If you stick to that in as natural a state as possible, unrefined, unprocessed carbohydrates, it's very hard to gain weight on those because they take up so much room in your stomach without adding enough calories.
Right.
And yet, what you can do is, if you want to, you can process your foods and you can make them very concentrated in calories, or you can go to the concentrated end of the scale with the nuts and the seeds and the oil, and that's too much fat.
Yeah.
But even for the carbohydrates, you have to be starch smart about it. You want to eat the starches, you want to eat the sweet potatoes and the taro and the yucca and the beans and their unrefined whole grains to give you that satiety and that staying power, because you can't just make it on salads. I mean, many people think that that's all what vegans eat, but when you take brown rice, let's say for example brown rice, 550 calories per pound of brown rice, but when you grind it up small into a flour, now it's got 1,450 calories per pound.
Right, because it's more energy dense.
It is more energy dense. All you did was take out the water, grind it into small particles. It's like you can pack it into a smaller space, but still you didn't take out any calories.
Right.
And so that's why if you eat foods made from flour, even if they're whole grain flour, you're having a harder time losing weight. And if you eat the nuts and the seeds every day, because some people have the misconception that if they don't eat fat with their leafy greens, they're not going to absorb their nutrients. But that is a misconception. That is a misuse of science. It's been done to market nuts and seeds, but that's not true. You don't have to have those added high-fat foods with your meals to absorb your nutrients. You're going to do just fine on a low-fat diet with less than 20%, 15%, even less than 10% of your calories from fat.
Right, right. That's true. So the McDougall diet recommendations, do you know off the top of your head what fat percentage he recommends? I don't know that off the top of my head.
He's not so into calorie counting,
he's
carb
more
tracking,
into
that kind of thing.
Eat as much as you can.
Yeah, he's into eating the unprocessed, natural, you know, the beans, the whole grains, the fruits, the veggies in there as natural state as possible without removing the water, without blending, grinding them up as much. And he does allow nuts and seeds, but the more weight you need to lose, the less nuts and seeds you need to meet your requirements.
Totally.
So, I'm not familiar with percentages, but I believe that Dr. McDougall recognizes that there are certain foods that have more than 20% of their calories from fat. And so those foods may need to be limited by those who are struggling to lose weight or reverse diabetes type 2.
Yep.
And so the foods that have more than 20% of their calories from fat would be soy and tofu and the nuts and seeds, of course, but also the avocado and the olives, and especially coconut. Right underneath the oils, coconut is very energy dense, very concentrated, and more than 80%, 90% of its fat is saturated, and that makes coconut have more saturated fat than lard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really shy away from coconut, although I love coconut. And I usually eat about, a tablespoon of coconut a year, usually when I'm on Maui. And I haven't had it yet because I was, just saving myself for this interview, and then afterwards I may go get some coconut today.
So you're going to eat like raw coconut?
Probably.
Cool.
Yeah.
One thing that I really thought was fantastic was how you brought into your talk the other night, you brought estrogen and the correlation between estrogen and fiber intake. You talked about that quite a bit. Can you kind of explain the link between estrogen and fiber, and why is that important to any average person?
It's wonderful to know that fiber is a sponge to carry excess estrogen out of the body. And I'm talking bioidentical estrogen, endogenous estrogen. Endo means inside, the estrogen we make inside ourselves. And why is this important for men as well as women? Well, when you have excessive levels of estrogen, you suppress a man's testosterone level. And so many men are fighting these low testosterone levels today.
Yes.
And the answer is not in pharmaceutical testosterone, even bioidentical testosterone. Don't let physicians inject you or apply on your skin. Don't let them give you that testosterone, gentlemen. Get the fiber increased into your diet, and you will lower your excess estrogen, and then you won't suppress your testosterone. And if a man has intact testicles, his estrogen levels come up in my, his testosterone levels come up in my practice. Like, when people come to my private family practice and they are suffering low testosterone, and these guys will allow me to measure their blood work at the beginning. Within 3 months of getting out the meat, dairy, eggs, oil, the fish, the chicken, caffeine, alcohol, all the things that will lower his testosterone levels come up. So you asked how fiber relates to the excess estrogen. 24/7, our liver is like a washing machine, and it's, as you know, it's taking out the things that it doesn't want, and one of the things it takes out is the excess estrogen. So it sends it down a little tube called the bile duct and dumps it into the small intestine, where it's hoping for a sponge called fiber to soak up the excess estrogen and carry it out with the stool. And the Western diet just doesn't have enough unrefined plants, doesn't have enough fiber to do that. So Western diets are excessive estrogen, and this creates cancer because excessive estrogen is a growth promoter, and growth out of control is cancer. If there isn't enough fiber in the intestines, you haven't eaten enough fiber, then the estrogen is going to get reabsorbed by the intestinal villi that line the small intestine, and back into the circulation the estrogen is going to go, and it's going to do its damage where it can cause memory loss and high blood pressure and cancers in both men and women, and not just the hormonal related cancers that you would think of, uterine and prostate and breast, but also thyroid cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, skin cancer. All the cancers are going to be much more initiated and metastasized with excess estrogen levels.
Yeah. As a general surgeon, I see a lot of breast cancer in my practice, and again, I think the estrogen is one of those huge factors. There's been a lot of studies, I'm sure you're aware of recently, that show higher fiber intake. So the more fruits and vegetables you eat as a cancer survivor, a breast cancer survivor, your survivorship goes up.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense with what you're saying too.
Fiber is key for breast cancer survivors, and of course to preventing breast cancer in the first place.
Right.
Back in the day, in the 1970s, Dr. Ken Carroll, he was a PhD from the University of Western Ontario, and he studied Ansel Keys data from the famous 7-country study started in the 1950s. And what Ken Carroll did was he correlated that the more saturated fat in the diet, the more breast cancer. And then along came Dr. T. Colin Campbell, PhD from Cornell University in biochemistry, and he said the more animal protein in the diet, the more cancer. And it's really true that the fiber is sort of opposite to the animal protein and the saturated fat. The more fiber, the less breast cancer. the more animal protein, the more cancer.
I also thought it was interesting in the China study, T. Colin Campbell has those graphs, and you actually showed them in your talk the other night, where he looks at breast cancer rates, and then he has by country.
Yes.
And then he has one by, I think he has one by dairy intake and maybe one by animal product intake. But what struck me is the top 2 countries. So the U.S. is number 2, and number 1 is the Netherlands.
Netherlands,
And
very
I
high
happen
fat
to be
diet.
a Dutch citizen,
Yes,
so for
yes.
me, it strikes home for sure.
Yeah,
And
it's
Dutch
important.
culture too, they love their cheese.
Cheese,
Like
yeah.
Dutch cheese is
It's
where
really,
it's at.
really
So
important.
we got to work on that.
Yes, we do.
Worldwide problem.
Cheese is so addicting because casein, one of the principal proteins found in cheese, binds to our own endorphin receptors and makes casomorphines and makes cheese addicting. It's one of the hardest addictions in food to kick. Refined
so true.
sugar and oil and salt and animal protein, especially like cheese, very hard addictions to kick. But I think your viewers want to know, is there hope for my taste buds? Can they change? And I believe that they can. Sometimes within as much as 3 weeks, taste buds can change. We saw them change at the Engine 2 immersion. We saw them change within a week. People
That's
were
amazing.
like loving the food and eating all that they wanted. And their taste buds were already starting to neuroadapt. But within 3 months, 6 months of completely cutting out animal protein and refined oils, you will be satisfied with a lower level of fat, a lower level of sweet, a lower level of calorie density, and you'll love your food and you'll have your health too.
And to bring the microbiome into that, so there's been a few studies that show that your gut flora can dictate your cravings.
Yes.
So if you think about that, like
Yes.
if you have a gut flora that is adapted to sugar and you crave sugar, if you kind of starve them, so to speak, of the
Yes,
sugar, you're
yes.
eating super healthy, or whether it's fat or whatever it happens to be, you're going to get a new population of gut flora, and your microbiome won't dictate your cravings so much. So that could tie into the
Absolutely.
taste bud change too.
Absolutely
really
right.
cool.
And there are gut microbiome bacteria that are alkaline loving and they know how to digest plants without giving you gas. And then there are bacteria in the colon and intestine that digest animal protein, which is a low pH, acidic.
Yeah.
And if you eat, animal protein one day and high plant food the next day, your gut microbiome is confused and you get more gas. But the good news about gas and taste buds is that they will change.
They will.
And the unhealthier your diet is when you start, the harder your withdrawal. You're going to feel it more.
Sure.
But hang in there. I used to call myself the fat-seeking missile because I had a very high-fat diet. And so it was difficult for me when I transitioned to a whole food plant-based diet that was oil-free because I wasn't used to the lower fat. And I grew up hating beans and vegetables, but now I love them preferentially. And you talked about weight loss. I eat beans, greens, squash, and yams. Those are my categories of food that I eat at breakfast. And then if I'm still hungry, and I always am, intact whole grains, and I eat that for breakfast and lunch. And I don't actually eat fruit until my evening meal. And so I have a big breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, supper like a pauper, so that it's easier to maintain the weight that I want.
Yeah, so catch that, viewers. So nothing sweet for breakfast. She does like beans, rice, yams, and she doesn't add the fruit
Salad.
until
Yep,
later. So I think that's a good way to live.
Yeah, for me, it cuts cravings.
Sure.
And I tend to eat more during the day if I have fruit at breakfast. I don't, it's probably the
Interesting.
insulin levels,
Yeah.
and the insulin's called forth by the fruit, and fruit you would tend to rise the blood sugar more, and insulin makes you have food cravings. And
Yeah.
so since I am a recovering food addict, it's nice to not have those cravings. To be
Totally.
able to walk through the airport and you're walking past Cinnabon and they're spraying the smell,
And the smell,
of
oh my
Cinnabon
gosh.
out into the air, trying to entice you in.
Yeah.
And to walk past that and not even be tempted.
no.
I mean, that's like freedom for me.
Totally.
No
That's
more
so
chains.
liberating.
It's good.
Cool. That's so funny. Cinnabon is one of those
Oh, yeah.
smells you can pick out anywhere.
Yep.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about some controversial stuff, just because I think that it's interesting. I like your take on it, and I think it would be fun to talk about it a little further.
Okay.
In your talk, you talked a little bit about the caffeine and the caffeine and coffee and tea and
Soda
its
and
effects on
chocolate.
your body, and
Yes.
soda and chocolate. So my husband had half a cacao pod for breakfast this morning. And he loves cacao, just raw, and raw whole food. But what can be hazardous about that?
Well, when you take raw cacao, it's 55% of its calories from fat coming straight out of the cacao. And your husband doesn't have a weight problem, and yay, good for him. But there are some people that's going to be a problem for them.
Right.
And cacao is naturally bitter, and you have to add a lot of refined sugar to it to overcome that natural bitterness.
Yeah, for sure.
And cacao is naturally gritty, so you have to add a lot of fat when you make it into chocolate, and most of that fat is saturated. Saturated fat is solid at body temperature, which means that at 98.6 degrees, when it's going through your arteries, it could plug your arteries. So if you're eating the cacao in the form of chocolate, which most people do, because cacao is naturally bitter and gritty,
right?
Then you're just getting a lot of fat. And for me, the caffeine and theobromine that are in cacao, they compete with the estrogen metabolizer enzymes in the liver called the cytochrome P450 system. And so you can raise excess levels of estrogen, which could promote cancer and suppress a man's testosterone and all that kind of stuff, by using foods that contain theobromine and caffeine. So that's what I have against that. And I know that your husband does not eat well, I don't know this, but I'm assuming that your husband does not eat milk. But if you add milk to chocolate, then you've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, the quadruple whammy of addiction. You've got the sugar addicting you, the high fat, the
salt.
There probably is salt in chocolate. The cacao and the sugar, the fat, the salt. The cacao has the theobromine, and then you've got the casein for the milk protein. So milk chocolate is quadruply addictive.
Yeah. So I think what's important too for the viewers is to understand that even if you get like an organic chocolate bar, you think that it's natural, you think it's plant-based, but there's a lot of additives to that, and it's not a natural thing when you have. So you're starting out with the cacao, you said is 55% fat, and then you're adding in more fat to make it into this nice creamy chocolate bar. It may not be the healthiest option.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of healthiest, there's a lot of allergen reactions to cacao, even just the raw cacao before you add the sugar or anything. And they postulate that this is insect wings, insect antennas, legs, little
so
body
it's not
parts
vegan.
of insects. Well, it may not be vegan, but I didn't even think of that. But it may be that those insect parts are what's contributing to the allergic reactions. And when I was on Maui, I gave an interview at KAKU Radio, the voice of Maui, for a show called Off the Record. And Bobby D. Best taught me, and I didn't know this, that cacao may not be as fair trade as we think, that there may be a lot of, she called it slave labor, and I don't know, I need to look into this and find out. It's like, is the way that we get it, is that exploiting native peoples of other lands?
Right.
It's like, I don't want to be part of that.
Totally. And you could drag that over to coffee too. There's a lot of, not sustainably harvested coffee beans and all that.
Right.
Yeah. In your talk this week at VSH, you brought up the topic of coffee and caffeine and why it's detrimental to our overall health. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Where do I start? Let me count the ways of how caffeine and coffee, besides the high blood pressure and besides making it harder to get your blood sugars under control and making you insulin resistant, and besides the diuretic effect, washing out your vitamin B12 and washing out your calcium and increasing your risk for osteoporosis and kidney stones and of course the insomnia. One thing that I learned that really kind of blew my mind is that one of the research studies showed that 1 cup of coffee had effects on the sleep-wake cycle for 2 weeks out after the 1 cup of coffee.
Wow.
Yeah,
one cup of coffee.
That blew my mind.
That's
insane. I did not know that. And sleep is so important. 2 hours of sleep before midnight are worth 4 hours of sleep after midnight. And for some people, the older they get, the harder it is to metabolize their caffeine. It's just going to be harder for them to fall asleep. But for most people, it's going to be harder for them to stay asleep, and they're going to wake up multiple times in the night. Caffeine has an effect on estrogen, and that's what most of my talk was about this week when we were together on Thursday night. caffeine and estrogen both compete for the same enzyme metabolizing system in the liver. It's called the cytochrome P450 system. And so the body has to focus on metabolizing caffeine because too much caffeine can be really toxic to the body. And so it will let estrogen slip by the radar, and so estrogen will get reabsorbed into the bloodstream if it gets taken out at all or not taken out enough. And so when excess estrogen levels rise, that suppresses a man's testosterone. So every sip of coffee suppresses a man's testosterone, but the excess estrogen also, besides raising blood pressure and causing memory loss, is a big growth factor. And without the estrogen, no fetus would grow, no breast would grow, no cancer would grow. And so the more estrogen, the greater the risk of cancer. And so Dr. Ken Ishitani did a really important study on cancer, breast cancer, and coffee. And he was studying ladies with benign breast disease. And that's the lumpy swelling, the pain, that really common. And so he found a dose-dependent relationship that the more caffeine you drank, whether it was in coffee or other forms, coffee, tea, soda, or chocolate, the more coffee that they consumed, the greater their risk of breast cancer. And this was also true, even though it was through the mechanism of estrogen at the cellular level, it was also true for breast cancers that were estrogen receptor negative and progesterone receptor negative. And it also tended to the more caffeine, the greater the risk of big tumors, greater than 2 centimeters.
So an independent effect when it comes to the link between caffeine and breast cancer, if it's also forming triple negative breast cancers.
Right.
And larger breast tumors.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. And that kind of ties in with my patients and my experience. I see a lot of patients that have cyclical breast pain, you know, whether there's lumps and bumps or not, but just pain around the time of their period.
Right.
First thing we tell them in our medical practice is cut out the caffeine, and it helps. And a lot of my patients don't know that. They don't know how big of a deal it is.
They don't know that. They don't realize that the more caffeine, the more uterine fibroids, the heavier the bleeding, the more unnecessary hysterectomies. And the reason that they don't know is because it's so easy in the media to hear good news about caffeine. It seems like coffee is getting good press every other week, it seems like. One of the things that the food industry hypes is the antioxidants. And true, you know, coffee comes from plants, and here's the news flash. Plants have antioxidants. The dairy doesn't have the antioxidants, and the meat and the chicken and the fish don't have the antioxidants, but the plants do, and that's good for us. But marketing is the method of hyping one good aspect of a product and minimizing the negative or harmful aspects of a product. So people don't realize how harmful caffeine really is. And there are many women who would not have had to have breast cysts drained. I mean, that's painful to have needles stuck in there. And they wouldn't have had to have surgery for breast cancer if they had a plant-based diet of whole and processed foods without caffeine. Yeah.
That's huge. Yeah. We were talking a little bit about caffeine and how it inhibits your sleep. Let's move to sleep a little bit, because I think that's a really important topic. So many Americans are sleep deficient these days. I feel like 6 hours or less is the new normal. There are substances people use to try to go to sleep, like alcohol, and that doesn't really help your sleep, right?
You're right, it doesn't, because even though alcohol is a depressant and it floods out the inhibitory neurotransmitters that put you to sleep more easily when you have the alcohol in your system, when it gets metabolized halfway through the night, you don't have enough of your inhibitory neurotransmitters, so you're like waking up more easily. So your night of sleep is much more disturbed, although you fell asleep easier when the alcohol was in your system. So it's much better not to use sleeping pills if you can avoid them, alcohol, other depressants like that, because of the effect when they wear off.
Right, right. And then the sleeping pills are a whole nother animal in themselves.
Yes.
I think in the medical profession we're too quick to prescribe these sleeping pills when people say they have insomnia, but sleeping pills, they're horrible.
I really think that sleeping pills deserve the black box warning that the FDA put on them, because memory issues are a real problem with sleeping pills. And so Zolpidem, which is sold as Ambien, And Esopoclone, which is sold as Lunesta, and the one sold as Sonata, they just got new black box warnings. I think it was just last month that, you know, these have an effect to make it harder for the brain to function well. And so I think doctors are going to think twice before they prescribe as many sleeping pills as they did before.
Absolutely. And there are some studies too showing that sleeping pills have been linked with higher cancer rates. So you add that on top of it.
Yes, yes. And people who have disturbed sleep, like the sleep apnea studies show that people who have sleep disordered breathing, specifically sleep apnea, which is stopping breathing in the middle of the night, have 65 times more cancers than people who don't.
Right.
And one of the things that can contribute to decreased air flowing through your nose and your tongue falling back and blocking is when you eat a plant-based diet, you're spared the congestion that comes when you eat dairy, oil, animal protein, because the congestion can cut down the amount of oxygen that you get in, and this makes your oxygen level fall below 94%, and that can make your adrenaline levels rise in the middle of the night and wake you up. And so when we wake up, we're sort of conditioned to think, oh, it must be my bladder that woke me up, so you go and empty your bladder. But this happens, you know, several times a night. It's disturbed sleep. And your body doesn't realize that you may have very valid reasons why your sleep is disturbed. Maybe you've got the dog in the bed with you, or you've got a baby to attend to, or maybe your husband snores. But if sleep is disturbed over and over, that harms health. Especially, it's harder to combat overweight, to combat depression, anxiety. It's just harder for the body, for the brain to have time to repair that it needs during sleep.
That dovetails really nicely with the research showing that disordered sleep, shift work, you know, switching your schedule back and forth does result in higher risks of cancer, chronic disease, etc. So there's a correlation there for sure.
I agree with you. Night shift work is really, really hard on the body. Those circadian rhythm disruptions have an effect for all kinds of chronic disease. When I was in the emergency department for the first half of my career, I was, you know, working night shifts. I found it difficult. That's when I learned that if you work night shifts for 10 years, you have the same risk of dying of a heart attack as if you smoked a pack a day of cigarettes for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That blew my mind when I found that out. And so I think if people can work, if they have to work the night shift, to limit it to when they're in their 20s and they can handle it a little better, they're going to do a lot better than if they continue working night shifts in their 40s and 50s. Because you get into the 50s and 60s, and those are called the cancer decades. Cancer is just much more likely to be one of the top killers in the 50s and 60s.
Sure.
So if we survive the 50s and 60s without getting cancer, then we enter our age 70 and 80, and that's the vascular disease, heart attack and stroke.
Yeah, it's funny how cancer seems, for the most part, to strike in a certain age group. And then if you can make it past that hump, I don't want to say you're cancer proof, but you seem to have a much lower risk of cancer. It's interesting.
It's just not as common because we have so much heart disease and stroke in this country. I mean, still, for most of the states in the United States, heart disease is still the #1 killer, but cancer is quickly on the rise. In fact, for the Kaiser Permanente data, they track what their patients get sick and die from, and in 8 Western states that Kaiser is in, cancer has become the leading cause of death. And in many racial groups, cancer has become the leading cause of death also now.
And I think the last CDC study, they showed that it's 12 states now where cancer is #1 out of the 50. So it's definitely taking over.
Cancer is on the rise, and that's why plant-based diets without alcohol and caffeine are really important. And I don't want to, you know, step on any toes or offend anyone, but alcohol is a big cancer promoter. And one of the reasons is, you know, the liver has to take out estrogen. But if we drink alcohol, the liver needs to stop worrying about estrogen and immediately focus on metabolizing alcohol. So it lets the estrogen stay in the circulation, and that is thought to be the mechanism, one of the mechanisms, whereby the more alcohol, the more cancer. But the alcohol industry has taken great care to hide the link between cancer and alcohol.
That makes sense. Breast cancer, we know, is directly correlated with alcohol intake.
Absolutely.
Even one drink a day can increase a woman's risk of breast cancer.
Very much it can.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up, I'm interested in how you put all this to practice. Tell me what your typical day is like. What's your routine? When do you wake up? What do you do? I'm just curious.
Okay. Well, I run a solo general practice, and that's pretty time intensive, and I don't have anybody to share call with, so I'm on call 24/7. I get up at 5 a.m. and the first thing I do is drink 16 ounces of water. I actually check my blood sugar every day because back when I was working in the emergency department and I didn't know about an oil-free, low-fat vegan diet, I was pre-diabetic. But now I'm not. Now I'm much older. I'm 59 years old, and now I'm not pre-diabetic. But I check my blood sugar every day to make sure that it's okay. So, and I drink my 16 ounces of water, and I have my spiritual time, and I do my stretching, and then I try to eat. I try to get exposure to sunlight before 8 a.m. if I can, and get out for a little walk, and I try to eat breakfast by 8 a.m. And one of the things that I do is I try to get 16 ounces of water an hour after breakfast, and then an hour after that, another 16 ounces of water. So I'm trying to drink 48 ounces of water in between my meals before lunch. And the reason for that is, especially first thing in the morning, is the water moistens the stool contents and gets them flowing, because you're about to eat a very high fiber breakfast, and you don't want to have gas, and you don't want to even think about your bowels. You want everything to just work smoothly. And so if you drink the water in between the meals, you're going to have the very best digestion and not even going to have to worry about digestive efforts. So I try to get my 64 ounces before 5 p.m. And I eat a plant-based diet, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no oil, and I eat a big breakfast. And my breakfast of champions, it's a system that we call Starch Smart System, and that's categories, 4 categories of food: beans, greens, squash, and yams. And it's not just that those are the only things that I eat, but there's many foods within those categories. And then if I'm still hungry, and I always am, it's intact whole grains like millet, barley, buckwheat, brown rice. And so I don't eat any fruit until my evening meal, about 5 p.m. And the reason that I eat a savory breakfast is because I am a recovering food addict and I don't want to be overweight. And when I keep the fruit just at dinner time, I don't have food cravings as much during the day. I seem to eat, I'm satisfied with a smaller amount of food and just full and happy. And so breakfast and lunch are the savory, the beans and the veggies and the whole grains, and dinner is the whole oat groats and the fruit. And I try to stop eating calories before 6 p.m. Because I try not to eat any calories after 6 p.m. so I can be in bed before 10 p.m. And in the evening time, after the patients are done for the day, I do telephone consults. They're accessible on vegivore.com. People can purchase telephone consults, and I call it food coaching so that I don't get in trouble for practicing medicine across state lines without a medical license. So I'm not prescribing medicine or ordering tests for people, but I offer that usually about 7 p.m. Texas time. And then in the evening, I'm on my treadmill computer. I have a treadmill set up with a computer,
Smart.
and that's where I do my charting and my bills. And so I'm trying to get that exercise in every day.
Awesome. Well, they say sitting's the new smoking, so it sounds like you are up and moving, and
That's right.
that's great.
Trying to do that, yeah. And I like to lift weights, get to the gym, and do that sometime in there too.
Cool, cool. So it sounds like, listening to your schedule, you eat dinner very early.
Yeah,
so you have
dinner about 5 p.m.
Yeah, you've got a time interval where you're fasting overnight, which
I do.
Studies show are pretty beneficial to have that time.
Especially for breast cancer. The studies have shown that the earlier you can finish your calories at night, the less the risk of breast cancer recurrence. They have studies that were
Interesting.
That were presented. I think it was 2 years ago that these studies were presented, and that was pretty exciting research. So my brand of intermittent fasting is I try to have about 5 hours in between breakfast and lunch, and 5 hours in between lunch and dinner at night, and no calories in between meals. I'm not snacking
Not
in
a
between
snack
meals.
throughout the day.
No, just water in between meals, and no calories after 6 p.m. Try to be in bed before 10 p.m. because 2 hours of sleep before midnight are worth 4 hours of sleep after midnight when it comes to a whole host of health benefits for your brain and memory, for your estrogen and testosterone levels, for your food cravings, for your blood sugar levels. Lot of good things happen if you can get to bed before 10 p.m.
Good to know. Noted. Bed before 10 p.m.
Yes, and if you do, you'll be less tired in the morning and you'll be less likely to need that caffeine.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Carney, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. It really was a pleasure.
I am very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for making it so comfortable and easy.
Totally. Where can my viewers find you if they want to talk with you or maybe get a consult or just get more information?
Okay, they can watch the free trailers of my 6 videos at veggievore.com, VEGGIEVORE, veggievore.com. And there's so many free things on drcarney.com, drcarney.com. And if you go to drcarney.com, you can sign up for a free membership, and there's a whole community of us to answer questions that people have. If you want to blog, we've got a platform there that you can blog about the whole food plant-based diet. And my practice is at All Med Physicians, and I'm just there south of Austin, Texas. And you can call our office phone number at 512-295-7877. If you're not into paying online on the internet for a phone consult, but you want one, I usually do them at 7 p.m. Texas time, that's Central Time. And for viewers in Maui, I would figure out a different time because we're 5 hours different from you. So. Oh no, but that
wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah,
middle of the day.
So 7 p.m. would be like 2 p.m. Maui time. So yeah,
exactly.
that would work.
Exactly. Cool. So we'll put the links in the description below so you'll know where and when to find and call Dr. Carney.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for watching so much. Isn't she incredible?
Thank you.
If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you really want to support us, subscribe to our channel. We love hearing from you, so let us know what you want to hear about. Just comment on topics you want us to address, and we'll definitely do it. Until next time, aloha. Thanks for watching.